From the bleachers to the bar, this is the Home Runs and Handshakes podcast. Welcome in, my friends. Yes, this is episode 11 of Home Runs and Handshakes. He is Frank Nova, Screw the Crew, a beautiful sentiment indeed, especially after those useless New York Mets decided they didn't feel like winning a single game up in the great Wisconsin North. And I am James Neveau. No clever nicknames for me today, but I'm wearing a cool hat if that gets me any points with our viewers on YouTube. Shout out to the Wisconsin frozen pizzas that I am representing today. I got a coupon for a free Jack's Pizza, by the way, with this hat. So anyway, yeah, I thought it was a decent story. Yeah. They are unfortunately, I believe, a Brewers affiliate. So we're going to stop talking about them immediately because I don't want to deal with any of those guys right now. Instead, we
wear the pizza.
Exactly right. They're usually the Wisconsin Timber Rattlers, which is also an extremely good minor league baseball name. I will give them a lot of credit for their marketing, just kind of overall. It seems like they've got a lot going for them. But I wanted first, Frank, episode 11, any favorite number 11 Cubs? I immediately thought of a Ray Sanchez came to mind for me. A Ron Say, I believe, also wore number 11, if I'm not mistaken. Did anybody jump out to you?
My mom's favorite player, Don Kessinger.
Attaboy. See, that's why I keep you around. You remember that. I never would have, because obviously not my vintage exactly. I'm frankly shocked I remembered Ron Say wore that number. So, you know, you watch enough like videos about the 84 Cubs, I guess things just kind of get stuck in the old noodle. But anyway, we're not here to talk about the past. We are here to talk about the present and the future for the Chicago Cubs. Things are, how do I say this? They are very up and down for this team right now. You've had some really good games from them where they've scored a bunch of runs, and other games where it seems like they forgot how to swing the bat. They forget how to pitch. They forget how to basically do anything. And all the while, the juggernaut that could, the Milwaukee Brewers, have just continued to win baseball games as the Cubs enter action on Sunday, 5.5 games behind Milwaukee in the National League Central. Just a remarkable turnaround with the Brewers playing the way that they have over basically a quarter of the season at this point. It is so crazy how well Milwaukee has been playing lately and just giving absolutely nothing up to the Cubs. And we're going to kind of talk a little bit of big picture stuff here to kind of jump off of the podcast here. But Frank, I look at this Brewers team and it boggles my mind that they've been able to do what they do. And I know, you know, you see all the metrics, like they're not a great slugging team. They're not a team that's going to hit the ball out of the park a lot, but it just really feels like they get the clutch hit whenever they need to. And they could just devise runs, conjure them out of thin air by literally being able to do anything, whether it's a hit by pitch, a little dink single, whatever it is, they seem to be able to do it. And it's really hard to determine when exactly this regression is going to come because it feels inevitable, and yet the sword of Damocles just continues to float there above their heads.
Well, the whole relationship right now between the Cubs and the Brewers is so reminiscent of 1969, where the difference is DeRocher never used his bench guys, and Counsell looks down at his bench and has to run the same guys out. He has no choice. But the Brewers are like the 69 Mets, just everything works. Last night, William Contreras hits a fly out to the outfield, but the umpire says, no, wait, it's no pitch. There's a clock violation on the pitcher. Next pitch is in the seats.
Mm-hmm.
And today, the Mets were up 5-0, and as soon as the Brewers got their first run, you're like, here we go. You knew it was going to happen. It was just, how was it going to happen?
Inevitable.
And so, yeah, that's what we got. And you know, it's one of these things where just, if you look at the 69 Mets, outside of Tom Seaver, Jerry Koosman, you know, those really good pitchers that they had. But you look at their starting lineup and there was really nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Cleon Jones hit 340 or 341, maybe. I can't remember exactly. But I think their big power bat was Tommy Agee with like 20 home runs. It just everything worked. You know, they had one game in September that year where Steve Carlton struck out 19 Mets, but Ron Swoboda, I know a lot of these names mean nothing to you. Ron Swoboda hit two two-run home runs. They beat Carlton, who struck out 19 Mets.
Yeah.
And
it's frankly unbelievable that like that's the level of kind of devil magic we're looking at. It's like the St. Louis Cardinals of, you know, the 2010, 2011 era, where it's just like eat your heart. Like it literally does not matter like who goes down. There's always going to be a Colton Wall there. There's always going to be a David Eckstein. There's always just going to be a guy to do something pesky and annoying to you. And I know it just comes off as probably a little bit of sour grapes, and rightfully so. But I just, for the life of me, if you looked at any Brewer fan before the season and you were like, hey, by the way, just so you know, like Sal Frelick's going to have like a 2.5 WAR this season and that stuff, they'd have been like, yeah, right. Okay. Like that. Sure. That's going to happen.
right. And, you know, and the Cubs, I mean, granted, even if the Cubs played their usual win 2 out of 3 games, the Brewers still would have blown past them like they were standing still, because the Brewers can't lose.
Yeah. I mean,
But
they've won 9 in a row at this point. I think Benetti on the broadcast said last night that they might have 3 different 7-game winning streaks this season.
yeah,
That's hard to keep pace with. It really is.
it is. But, you know, the Cubs' problem is because they don't have the depth. You know, you see what Pete Crow's going through right now, and
Mhm.
you're hoping, you know, games like last night, you're hoping maybe Tucker's starting to come out of it. Michael Bush has always been a streak hitter. Maybe last night is the start of him heating up. And, you know, you're kind of hoping, kind of got your fingers crossed. But these guys can't get days off. They have to find it on the fly. You can't sit them long enough for them to reset. And, you know, I know we were going to talk about the trade deadline again
We
and
are.
Michael Soroka and all that, but here's one of my other things. Okay, if these 2 outfielders down in Iowa are so damn precious, why aren't they up here? So, you know, let Kyle Tucker get hurt for 15 days. Let Pete Crow get hurt for 15 days. Bring these guys in, because right now Pete Crow can't buy a hit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and you see too, like these guys are out there, they're not covering ground in the outfield like they were early in the season either. These guys need a breather. They need to recalibrate. And look, you've got a lead. You're the top wild card team right now. So even if you can't catch the Brewers, you're still going to need these guys ready to go in the postseason. Get them reset, get them
Yeah.
recalibrated. You can't wait until September 1st, bring up Casey and Alcantara and try to slot them in.
Yeah.
You know,
And you're
because
not, are you really giving them consistent playing time at that point in the season anyway? No,
you're
probably
not.
not, because all of those games at that point could potentially be must wins, because you don't want to be in a situation where you have to go on the road for the wild card round or whatever it is. Like the Cubs will be playing for something in September, and God only knows that they're not going to sit there and be like, oh yeah, Owen Casey, you're going to play 2 days in a row or 3 out of 4. Like that's just not going to happen at this
Right.
point. So I think it'd be better off now if you were to do something like that and maybe save a little bit of mileage on one of those guys. And it just doesn't seem like the Cubs are kind of willing to do that at the moment.
They aren't. And, you know, and one of the few Cubs who actually hasn't been awful is Reese McGuire. And Reese McGuire is playing his last game as a Cub tonight.
Yeah, odds are, because you're probably getting Miguel Amaya back on Tuesday, and God knows the Cubs probably are not going to sit there and say sayonara to Justin Turner. Like I don't think that's going to happen when you bring back Miguel Amaya, because you know you want that right-handed bat in the event you need somebody to hit against a lefty. And again, something we can get into on this podcast, but we just kind of, I think we started with the bigger picture view here, because that's kind of the point that we're at right now, right? You're watching the Brewers kind of blow past you. You're kind of keeping an eye on the Padres and the Mets a little bit, because they're behind the Cubs in the wild card race right now. Again, Cubs in a very good position to at least make the playoffs. I think Fangraphs going into today, this is being Sunday, we're recording this, I think had the Cubs at a 98% chance of reaching the postseason. I think that the odds are still very much in their favor to at least get in. But at this point, you're still looking at this question of whether or not you're going to be able to catch the juggernaut Brewers, or even if they regress a little bit, the Cubs have to prove that they can go and reel them back in. And yeah, you've got all of the elements of like the easier schedule down the stretch. Not that that's ultimately mattered too terribly much lately based on the way the Cubs are even playing against subpar competition. But to me, it's just crazy to think about that we're at this point in the season. We have less than 50 games left, and you have to ask yourself a lot of questions about whether or not this team is not just playoff caliber, because I think that we, with a fairly good degree of certainty, can say that they are a playoff caliber team. Like, they have enough horses to get into the postseason. It's a matter of whether or not they have the ability to do anything beyond that I think is still extremely in question, especially with what's happened to them over the course of the last week with the Soroka injury and with the continued struggles of a lot of their key players.
And what was Jed Hoyer thinking? I mean, you and I talked about Soroka, and it's like, okay, well, he gets a lot of ground balls, and maybe it can help. But how did Jed Hoyer not know that this guy had an MRI to check on his loss of velo and what a huge risk he was? And he pitches 2 innings for the Cubs, and now he's on the injured list.
Yeah.
And
only shut down 7 to 10 days, Frank. So it's only a very short-term thing, because surely it will resolve itself.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, granted, they didn't really give up. We're hoping they didn't give up anything good.
Yeah, that'd be kind of annoying if they did. Yeah.
But still, it's one of these things. Like,
you know what? I was just going to say, like, let's talk about this. Like, I feel like we kind of have been dancing a little bit around a couple of different topics here, and I'm really ready to go into this one, because when you had Jed Hoyer speaking to the media after what happened with Soroka, where he pitched again the 2 innings, and it was like he threw 30 pitches and he was done, and it's the shoulder strain, whatever it is, and you had the velocity down, and as you said, it came out after that he had an MRI before his last start with the Nationals because he was concerned about that dip in velocity. And then you hear what Jed Hoyer says, and you just sit there and think to yourself, that was your ace in the hole. Like, that was your kind of cunning move at the deadline, was to bring in a guy that, for lack of a better term, is damaged goods. Here's what Jed Hoyer literally said. We knew the velocity was trending down. We talked through that extensively. Given the market, given the asking price, we felt like it was a good bet to make. Right now, it's not looking like a good bet. No crap. That risk profile was known. We spent a lot of time on that. We did a lot of due diligence, a ton of research. And if it doesn't work out, it's on me, says the guy who just signed a contract extension.
Yeah. I mean, knowing what we know Jed Hoyer knew about Michael Soroka, that's a move that's a non-roster invite for spring training. That's not your deadline pickup.
No. And the only one that you made. Like, if you want to do that and go and pick up a guy like a Merrill Kelly, for example, or any of the other rental starting pitchers they could have gone out and gotten, like a Dylan Cease even. Hell, that would have been something the Padres, would have probably requested quite a bit from you, and maybe a little bit more than what you were comfortable to give out. But the point being, and we've said this until we're blue in the face, every other Cubs podcast has said this in the entire world, what good are your prospects if you're not willing to move them in a situation like that, where you have to get up to what the market is demanding? You don't get to sit there and just like twiddle your thumbs and go, oh, well, we don't like where the market is. You only get so many opportunities with Kyle Tucker in your effing lineup to go and make something happen. And the Cubs were just like, but the market is just not there. And that is a completely unacceptable way of conducting your business. And look, I get it. If you don't want to give up Owen Casey for a rental, I'm not going to be mad about that. But then don't complain about the market afterward. And especially don't make a half-ass move like getting an already injured pitcher.
And okay, the thing that kept getting floated around, and can we say bullshit on this one?
I'd say that's okay. PG-13, sure.
Okay, so it's all bullshit. They wanted Cade Horton, they wanted Matt Shaw. It's like, you can't tell me that every single team out there wasn't going to budge unless they got Cade Horton. Okay, if you're getting Mackenzie Gore and they are stuck on Cade Horton, that I understand.
Mm-hmm.
But Merrill Kelly, no, he is not costing you Wade Horton. I don't even know if Merrill Kelly costs you Ben Brown.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't. And it's not like Texas gave up that much to get him. You go back and look at
Yeah.
all of those rental deals. That is not the going rate. Like Yohan Duran, who went to the Phillies, he wasn't going to cost you Cade Horton. And look what he's done for the Phillies. Like that was an Aroldis Chapman type move for the Philadelphia Phillies. They very clearly identified we need a stalwart closer who's going to blow the ball past you every ninth inning for the rest of the season. They went out and got him. And again, we already did this whole song and dance last week where we talked about, all of the contenders making the moves that they needed to make. And they were these big swings. And all the Cubs can do is sit there and hold their hat in their hands and complain about the market. It just, all of this stuff with Soroka just screams to me that the Cubs were just not willing to take this seriously. And they're just perfectly content to just go and win 87 games and get into the playoffs and potentially get, ousted by the Padres, or worst case scenario in my mind, going up against the Brewers in the NLDS and get absolutely, housed. So something like that just seems inevitable at this point, given what they did and didn't do at the trade deadline.
Well, and this goes back to what I talked about last time, which is what you and I consider to be a measure of success might not be the same thing that is considered to be a measure of success with the Ricketts family, with Crane Kenny, and by extension, Jed Hoyer.
Mm-hmm.
Their measure of success might be, look, we've got a full ballpark, we're selling lots of beer, the rooftops are full. That's money we don't have to share with anybody. Gallagher Way is hopping. We don't have to share that money with anybody. All these other business concerns we've got in and around Wrigleyville, we don't have to share that money with anybody. And, people are watching Marquee. So we have better reach and frequency for our advertisers.
And let me tell you something about Marquee, by the way. After this season, when they go up to the tippy top tier of Comcast and Xfinity, and people have to pay more money to get Marquee or have to pay for the streaming service to get Marquee, you got to wonder, like, okay, what are the Cubs going to do to rake in those bucks? And you'd have to imagine if the Ricketts maybe were penny pinching a little bit, and then you kind of hope to yourself, well, maybe they're going to open up the checkbook because they know a lot of people are about to have to pay a lot more money to watch that product. And you saw what happened with the rollout of CHSN and the way that everybody kind of handled that when the Bulls and the Blackhawks weren't on TV. It was just kind of a collective shrug because those teams weren't worth watching. Yeah, try to say that 4 times fast, Jim.
Right.
All right. Yeah, so go ahead, buddy. Sorry.
I was going to say, and that's the thing is, like, people aren't going to pay $20 a month for DTC.
No, they're not.
I mean, $20, that's more than I pay for MLB. And granted, I'm out of market, so I get Cub games, but that's ludicrous to me. Like, that's what they're charging. I would think that they would try to give some sort of a competitive rate. Get eyes on screens. When you have eyes on screens, you can sell advertising.
Mm-hmm.
There's more money in advertising than there is in subscription fees. And I don't know. I feel like for people with this much money flowing through this baseball team, I feel like there's a lot of misunderstanding of how actual business works.
And I will point out, Comcast is completely within its right to charge whatever it wants in terms of, what tier they're going to put the Cubs on, because they know darn well that's not going to make or break anybody's cable decision whether or not they're able to get the Cubs. They know that is completely on the Cubs, and they use that to their advantage in negotiations. And I do have to say, qualifier, I'm employed by NBC Universal, which is, owned by Comcast. So I do have to say that, but I also have to say I completely understand why Comcast played the game the way that they did.
Yeah, well, the one advantage that the Cubs have is they at least have a carriage contract.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, people are going to be getting hit, but they're not going to be unable to watch the Cubs. Yeah. And the thing with CHSN was that was just unbelievably bad decision made by all the teams involved to because you had something that was working and you decided to spin off into doing the exact same thing just
But
with
not
a different.
nearly as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and CHSN is basically the exact same model that they had with, again, your employer, Comcast Sportsnet or NBC Sportsnet Chicago or whatever it was called when I left. I don't even remember. But, they had something that worked, and, you know, like one of the first rules of common sense is if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well, the teams insisted that they were like, well, we kind of have the recipe, so we can make the pizza, and they kind of forgot to get the secret ingredients essentially, and then oh yeah, decided not to build the kitchen until the day before the restaurant opened. Like
Well,
that's
I,
carried
well,
the
that was the thing. They
form.
didn't have a restaurant. They left the restaurant without a new restaurant.
Yeah, and then they were like, well, we're gonna open up. Wait, shit, we literally have nothing to make anything. Like, it's very reminiscent. There was a Family Guy episode where Peter and the guys start a rock band. They get to the first gig, they're all ready to play, and then they go, oh my God, we don't know any songs. That's essentially what just ended up happening with CHSN, I think. But you know
Yeah.
what? They've gotten their feet underneath them a little bit at this point. So I don't want to continue to, badger them or anything. But I think ultimately the point is that the Cubs, like, they have to get into a space where they have to recognize that they're about to get bumped up on that Xfinity tier, and that is going to be incumbent upon them to get people to continue to, buy into that. Otherwise, there's not going to be the interest there for your advertisers, and you're going to lose money based on that. And so I do think ultimately the Cubs are going to have to make some moves to kind of address that, even if they're not necessarily super DJ Jazzy Jeff about it.
Well, that we always have Prevagen.
The never-ending ads. My dad and I were watching the ball game last night, and he was talking about how some networks just continually air the same ads over and over again. And all I could think of, and I remembered it, which is kind of ironic, is the Prevagen ads on Marquee, just seeing them constantly. So there, Prevagen, you just got 2 free plugs from us. I hope you really enjoy that, and for whatever that's worth. All right, so this was all.
Hey, and you know what? When we start doing the Friday flashback or whatever it is we're going to call it, we're going to have it presented by Prevagen because I'll be using my memory.
Damn right. See, Claire, we write the marketing script ourselves. Like, it's so amazing, the collective brain power of the 2 men that are currently talking into the microphones here. Where the hell was I? Oh, yes. We were about to talk about the thing that we've literally spent the last 23 minutes kind of winding up to. And that's this idea of whether or not the Cubs are actually a World Series caliber team after the trade deadline. And it's one that you and I have talked about quite a bit since that deadline passed. But Jesse Rogers of ESPN went out and actually spoke to a group of experts about this. He spoke to, I believe it was an MLB scout, an MLB coach, and then it was MLB executive, MLB coach, MLB scout. So talked to 3 people kind of about the Cubs and about like the 3 different areas of their team and whether or not they are World Series caliber. And so we'll start out with the pitching rotation, because I think that we've already delved into Soroka and what they did and didn't do at the trade deadline. And there are concerns there, and rightfully so, I think. Most of them complimentary kind of the top guys that are there. Recognizing that Justin Steele is out kind of complicates things a little bit. But they legitimately just said, they were like, look, we thought the Cubs were going to do more, and we thought that they had the assets to do more, and we don't know how confident we're feeling with Shota Imanaga and Matthew Boyd, and then whoever it is you're going to roll out in Game 3. Like, basically the consensus was, we think you can get to October with this, but you can't get deep into October with this. And yeah, you may be able to cobble together a start of 4 or 5 innings, but it would be really helpful if you had at least just like one more guy that you could put more trust in than you realistically, no matter how well he's been pitching lately, then you can put into Cade Horton or into Colin Ray in that Game 3 scenario.
Yeah, well, right now it would have to be Horton. He's just been so good.
He's shoving, dude. He's so good right now. Like, what, 24 consecutive scoreless innings for him now?
Yeah, he, as much as we drag Jed Hoyer and as much as he deserves the dragging, man, they got it right with him. He was a reach, but he was a good reach.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there have been several moves Jed's made like that. Like Michael Bush, I think, is another really good example of that. Yeah, the Dodgers got a really strong prospect out of that, but it's not like that was any sort of a guarantee, the prospect they gave up. And then Michael Bush has not been a guy that's like completely, fizzled out or was like, oh, he just is going to be a dude for another team. Been legitimately really, really solid for the Cubs. So
Oh yeah.
there you go. Jed Hoyer, we've given you a couple of them now. There you go, buddy. Enjoy those compliments.
But yeah, I would think your front three are Shota, Boyd, and Horton.
Even
And
even after Jamison Tyon comes back, I think you're absolutely right.
yeah, and and that's the thing. Tyon actually pitched well this time in Iowa.
Did
So hopefully he'll be back soon.
keep the ball in the ballpark, JMO.
I know that's been pretty rare this year, even before he got hurt.
Yep.
And Javier Assad's lurking out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, threw I think 70 pitches in his last rehab assignment outing. So
Yeah,
definitely a guy they're looking at potentially, I think, filling a rotation spot or making spot starts if they need him to. I'm going to be on the record, by the way, as saying I think his first start comes in that 5-game series against Milwaukee. I think he ends up pitching one of the games in the doubleheader.
yeah. If he's still doing his rehab assignment, he'll be the doubleheader guy, the 27th
I believe
guy.
that is exactly what the Cubs have envisioned for him, for sure.
Um, and so I mean, help is on the way. And this is the other thing with the Brewers is okay. So the Cubs did basically, they got a couple of relievers at the deadline. Actually, the one really good pickup they made at the deadline was Willie Castro. I will say right now, if the Cubs want to extend Willie Castro tomorrow, I am perfectly happy.
Okay.
He's one of those guys. If you want to if you want to win the division, you want to win the pennant, you want to win these things, you've got to have guys like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I remember after the 2015 season, that was a big question for the Cubs was, okay, well, the Cubs need a Zobrist type. And who's it going to be? Like Javier Baez, he can play second, he can play short, he can play third. Can he play the outfield? I don't know. And they were kind of trying to figure out like who could be like the Ben Zobrist type. But then they went out and got actual Ben
I was going
Zobrist.
to say, like, we all know the end of that story. They went out and got the actual Ben Zobrist.
Yeah.
Castro's versatility, like, we're not saying he's Ben Zobrist. Like, I think that is a really tough mountain to climb. But the impact is there because you can literally fill him in at so many spots and give dudes days off. It's critically important.
And he's productive from both sides of the plate.
Oh, yeah. God, that's so useful. And also, I think dovetails perfectly into, well, I was going to go to bullpen, but I think we might as well go to lineup right now. And I think everybody was very complimentary of the Cubs in this lineup question and whether or not it's, World Series caliber, because when you've seen it, when it's humming at its absolute maximum, this lineup is legitimately scary 1-9. Any one of those guys is capable of putting the ball in the seats, especially with how well Matt Shaw has been hitting lately. Like, it's been remarkable the second half turnaround that he's had. But the one question they all raised was that question of depth and that ability to kind of, tinker with the lineup to get guys days off. And yeah, Willie Castro is great in these situations, but he's still only one guy, and you're still end up in positions where if two dudes need a day off, that gets a little dicey for the Cubs, to say the least. So I think that of the three groups, they were most complimentary of the lineup, but they brought up the depth, and they also brought up when you have to face a left-handed pitcher, not the most thrilling lineup you can put together right now.
No, I mean, what do you got? You got Seiya Suzuki. You got whoever's going to be catching once Amaya comes back.
Yep.
And Matt Shaw.
Yep.
And those, I mean, Ian Happ from the right side of the plate isn't giving anybody any pitcher night sweats.
Nope. Also, by the way, an owner of a plus 1.00 OPS over the last 12 games, Ian Happ is. I'm wondering, Frank, is there these little rumblings? Like, is he seriously going to do the thing again?
I don't know. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see him just.
I'm still a doubter. I'm a doubter, and prove me wrong, Ian. Like, no offense
Yeah.
to you, man, but it has been a rough season for number 8 in white and blue.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see it for obvious reasons. It would be fun,
Yeah,
but
sure, and hugely useful to the lineup, especially with how badly Seiya Suzuki has largely been hitting lately.
yes. Um, but overall, I mean, just Kyle Tucker's not hitting, Pete
Nope,
Crow's not hitting.
nope.
Um, Michael. The other thing I love about Michael Bush is it's been a long time since the Cubs have had a genuine, bona fide Cardinal killer.
And God, is he, man? It is
Yeah,
great.
it's just like old times. Bush owns the Cardinals.
I completely agree with that. I do want to bring up PCA a little bit separately, just based on some of his numbers he's put up recently, and the fact he's going to be mic'd up in the ESPN Sunday night game tonight. So I'm sure a lot of folks are going to be kind of asking themselves, "Hey, what the hell happened to PCA?" So we'll get into that in a second. But I did want to mention one other thing from that Jesse Rogers piece, and it was about the team's bullpen, and I think that again, mostly favorable. They were very complimentary of guys like Caleb Thielbar, who's been really solid this season. Lots of plaudits for Daniel Palencia, and rightfully so. But the big question they had is whether or not you trust Daniel Palencia to be that guy in late September, early October, when there's really not a ton of backing behind him. Like, it's not like there's not a Pedro Strop that you can go to in a situation like that. There's not a Hector Rondon. Like, Daniel Palencia, has been just an absolutely nails closer, and it's so rare that he's made any sort of like really catastrophic mistakes. But who do you trust in that role other than him right now? It is a probably non-existent list, to be completely honest, and they, I think, rightfully pointed to that as a concern at the back end of games.
And this is another area where Jed Hoyer just completely shanked it.
Yeah. He
You
got
know,
sixth
the,
and seventh inning guys and completely ignored the fact there was still an eighth inning to deal with.
right. I mean, Brad Keller's been good, but is Brad Keller really your plan B if something goes wrong with Palencia?
Well, I mean, I think we probably all looked at Daniel Palencia and we were like, that's your ace in the hole there, Craig. He's the guy that, like, we all kind of saw the potential, but we had all also seen the results. And it's like, we're willing to eat crow on that one, but I'm also willing to say you're probably not going to catch that kind of lightning in a bottle twice in the same season.
Right. And Palencia is one of those guys where you watched him pitch for a couple of years, and you're like, if he could just ever figure out the strike zone, he's going to be deadly.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going through that same thing with Luke Little.
Yep. God. Yeah, Luke Little, who the ball is like the size of like a pea in his hand.
Yeah,
Like,
it looks like it's a
you think
ping pong ball coming out
you
of his
would think
hand.
he could control it just a little bit better than he does.
He's just so massive, and that the ball comes from such a weird angle because he's so tall.
Yep. It's
And
so strange, man, but it's so still very thrilling to watch him, and he's a guy that you kind of pray to the baseball gods ends up figuring it out and kind of taking care of business at some point in his career.
yeah, yeah. I mean, will he ever be a closer? Probably not, but he
No,
can
you just
be.
never know, man. You never know.
Yeah,
All right. Well, you know what? I talked about PCA a little bit. I think we can dig into this now. I had started to get a little worried about him at a point in July, and then he kind of went on a little bit of a mini tear. He played really well. I think it was like the Boston series that he looked kind of like he had figured a few things out. And I was like, all right, maybe my panic about PCA was a little premature, but his last 14 games does not have a single home run, only has one extra base hit his last 8 games. So far in August, 2 for 30 with 12 strikeouts. I think the worry that I have about PCA isn't necessarily just that he strikes out a lot, because I think that is just kind of baked into it at this point. Like, he's not going to be a guy who's going to draw a ton of walks, at least not right now. I think the worry that I have is when he is making contact right now. Does it not feel to you like he's just kind of pressing at the plate like right now and trying to like hell to get out of this slump that he's in? It doesn't feel like he's kind of letting the game come to him, which I felt like he was doing a lot of earlier in the season. It really does feel over these last 10 to 15 games that he's really started to kind of tighten his grip on the bat, and he really wants to kill it and kind of get out of this. But it's been just kind of painful watching him recently. And I really, really hope that he's able to kind of pull out of this tailspin a little bit, because that's a guy that I know we talk about the Cubs needing Kyle Tucker in order for that lineup to really be humming. God, do they need PCA to really get things going again?
Yeah. Yeah. Because PCA, I mean, he needs to get on base, and because he can get on base, he can create some havoc.
Mm-hmm.
And this is part of the problem. They put him in the middle of the lineup. And ever since they put him in the middle of the lineup, he was hitting for a while, but that's really when he stopped doing all the Pete Crow things
Mm-hmm.
that made him such a unique weapon. Where, just no pitcher could think about the hitter all that much because Pete Crow was on base.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is what Javier Baez was so good at. I mean, Javier Baez, he always saved, what was his name? The center fielder for the Lorenzo Cain. He lived in Lorenzo Cain's head. Lorenzo
Yep.
Cain would make some of the worst defensive decisions when the ball came to him and Javier Baez was on base.
Yep.
And that's the sort of thing that we need from Pete Crow. And him being in the middle of the order can't really provide that. And they have been dropping him down in the order, hopefully to get him going. And that's one of the things I'd actually love to see, is because Swanson has been doing a better job of hitting, is put Pete Crow down low in the lineup with Shaw, with Horner, and let him just relax. Say, look, just don't think about home runs. Just get a single, get on base. We got Nico, we got Shaw. Let's turn this into a track meet.
Absolutely. And to Frank's point, by the way, I think PCA has he has one stolen base his last 17 games. Like, even when he's been getting on base, he's not been stealing at the same rate. And the Cubs are a completely different team when PCA is actively stealing bases, causing havoc out there. And I know he's had the doubles here and there, and that's just been another great example where only like a handful of guys can probably get the stolen bases and the doubles that he gets. We're just not seeing that nearly enough right now with him. And I think that, again, that's just a way that this lineup is optimized, as if he is able and willing really to do all of that. And I question whether or not he's like pressing too much, if there's anything Craig Counsell can do to kind of shake him out of it. Like, I don't see him hitting like seventh, eighth. I don't think that Craig's going to want to drop him like that. I think that there's always going to be kind of the ego that gets put into play in situations like that, where he's not going to want, PCA to think that he's kind of given up on him. But at the same time, you do want to lessen that pressure a little bit. And I wonder if there are different ways that they can do that. And like you said, maybe dropping him to like fifth or sixth, maybe that's just going to be what you kind of have to do right now. And maybe you bump up a guy like a Dansby Swanson and Nico Horner, who's been hitting really well lately. I think like batting at a 350-ish clip the last 18 games. Or, God forbid, maybe bump Matt Shaw up just a little bit in the lineup, given the power that he's been able to generate recently.
Yeah, I mean, Shaw's been really, really good. And, again, he's a guy who he gets on base. Shaw is the second fastest guy in the Cubs.
Yeah.
He's faster than Horner.
Man, it's crazy.
He's faster than Horner, which is saying something.
Mm-hmm.
So, let these guys get on base. And, lately, and maybe it's Counsell, he's just not cutting these guys loose the way he was.
I wonder about that too, like if there's been a little bit of a tightening of the reins. But then again, you saw what happened on Saturday night rather, in St. Louis, where Kyle Tucker had that play where he scored when the ball kind of squirted away from Wilson Contreras, and Contreras just kind of looked at it like it had wronged him in some way. Yeah. There is still that aggressiveness there, and I don't think that Counsell has completely coached that out of the Cubs, but I wonder if maybe he's pulled the reins back just slightly because he doesn't want guys maybe pressing to score runs, given the struggles that they've had in that category recently.
Yeah, but at some point when they were playing at their best, they were a pretty freewheeling bunch of guys.
Yeah, well, that's always, everything kind of comes easy, and I think you're seeing that right now with the Milwaukee Brewers, where literally everything that they do is just kind of working out right now for them. And success begets success in that situation. You kind of attract, that kind of, vibe to you. So I think the Cubs can get back there. It's just kind of a matter of finding the right combination and getting some key guys, confident in hitting again. And those are big question marks because it's not like this has been kind of an isolated phenomenon. Like, this is a team that has struggled now for honestly pretty much like a month.
Yeah. And, something needs to be done. And, unfortunately, the only breath of fresh air to come into that lineup was Willie Castro.
Well, you're also going to get Miguel Amaya back, and I do think that'll at least be some sort of an injection. And I do still think you come up with a way to get a guy like Moises Ballesteros or Owen Casey to get a little bit more regular playing time down the stretch. I do think the Cubs are going to kind of look at those guys to give themselves at least a little bit of an injection, and I do think they need to do that sooner rather than later because, like you said, you can't wait till September 1st to do this. I don't think. I think it needs to happen sooner. If it requires a guy going on the injured list, I do think that is a very valid strategy to use. I know there are going to be guys like Kyle Tucker, who's like, I think the old axiom about Pete Rose, where they said getting him out of the batting cage is like getting a whale out of a bathtub. I can't imagine a scenario where Kyle Tucker's going to be like, yeah, I'll take 2 weeks off. Like, it feels to me like he's going to be like, I think that idea sucks and I don't like it.
Yeah. And, and that's also the case. That's also, I already said that I thought that the trade deadline punched his ticket out of town. That certainly wouldn't do him any favors.
No. And I think that maybe, Ian Happ would have been another candidate for that. But again, if you're 1,000 OPS over, a 12-game span, it's not like I can sit here and say, well, he's clearly still banged up. It's like, no, he's starting to drive the ball a little bit more. Maybe not the right time to cut bait with him. It's like that incident in Milwaukee kind of reset him a little bit. All right, the last thing we had to talk about really on the podcast today before we kind of get into a little bit of a preview of the week ahead is we did want to talk about a conversation that Anthony Rizzo had in recent days with Johnny Menziel, who apparently hosts a podcast called Glory Days, which is pretty appropriately named for Johnny football. But definitely a lot of interesting kind of things came out of that conversation. Would encourage you guys to listen to that after you listen to our podcast, of course. Do not jump into it right now. We would be very sad. And Rizzo was asked about a couple of key things. One of them, he was asked about kind of the idea of a World Series hangover and whether or not it kind of impacted the Cubs in 2017. And he was very clear about it. He said that there absolutely was a World Series hangover. The struggles they had early in the season was largely due to that. It was kind of a desire thing where the team was like, okay, we want to get there again, but we know what it takes. And man, like, are we really willing to climb that mountain again? And Rizzo said that. But I think that the one thing that really stood out and the thing that I really want to dig into you with, Frank, was what he said about trade deadline acquisitions or the lack thereof. We all remember the Cubs going out and getting Aroldis Chapman and Mike Montgomery in 2016. We remember them getting Jose Quintana in 2017. But then we also remember them basically saying, we know you really want to come here, Bryce Harper. We're not going to sign you. In 2018, kind of didn't do much. In other years, they really weren't adding a ton of impactful pieces, and maybe because they were concerned about depleting their minor league system. But Anthony Rizzo phrased this really well. He said, when you're that good, that boost is everything to a team. And then there are years where we're in the same position and they don't give us that boost. And Frank, you thought it. I thought it. Every Cub fan thought it. He's talking about what happened this season too, and how the Cubs had this ability to go out and potentially make a game-changing type acquisition, but instead they complained about the market and they didn't get it done.
Yeah, and they're going to pay for it. They're going to pay for it. And, the best player the Cubs have had since the glory years is Kyle Tucker.
Mm-hmm.
And Kyle Tucker's going to walk. I guarantee that he looked at this trade deadline and, Kyle Tucker strikes me as a guy who hates losing. And I'm sure he's looking at what Jed Hoyer did and says, okay, this guy does not hate to lose. And how is Jed Hoyer going to sit down with Kyle Tucker and his agent with a straight face and say, we want to keep you here because we're committed to winning after what Tucker saw with his own eyes?
Mm-hmm.
And, and then he's going to go and have meetings with the Dodgers and the Phillies and the Yankees and maybe even the Mets. And they're all going to say, Kyle, We've got a commitment to winning. This is what we've done
Mm-hmm.
to show our commitment to winning. And we feel like you're a guy who can come in and say that, here's a guy you can come in and say, you're the last piece. You're the piece we need to get over the hump.
Mm-hmm.
The Cubs can't say that because he's the piece that's already here, and they're not getting over the hump.
Yeah, and they
What are you going to
didn't take steps to get over the hump. You're exactly right.
And how are you going to convince him to stay? Well, if you stay, we're going to have the same bunch of guys. Great, the same bunch of guys who lost in the NLDS. I don't want to spend the next 10 years of my life getting knocked out in the NLDS.
Mm-hmm.
I've won a
And
World
say
Series. I
all
want
you
to win
want.
another one.
And then what are you going to say? You're going to be like, oh, well, we've got Owen Casey and Kevin Alcantara coming up. It's like, oh, you mean the guy who is going to be blocked by me? The guy that's going to be blocked by Pete Crow-Armstrong? Like, try selling me somebody else. And you can point to a Jack Neely if you want, or a Connor Noland, and you're not going to get that kind of like, oh, yeah, I can see immediately where this vision is kind of leading. It's like, no, you clutched onto your prospects just a little bit too hard at the trade deadline, and I remember that more than whatever it is, whatever bill of goods you're trying to sell me right now.
Yeah, it's going to be hard and other free agents are going to look at what the Cubs did and say, yeah, why do I want to go there?
I think there's going to be some salesmanship on the part of the Cubs where they're like, we can bring in multiple guys. We've got the payroll flexibility beyond next season to do it. And I do think that will be sellable, and also will point out, get you under a big time contract before that next CBA kicks in and potentially imposes a salary cap.
Yeah. And I mean, the one thing the Cubs can do, I don't know how creative they are. The Dodgers are the kings of this, is they could sit down with Kyle Tucker and say, look, Kyle, we know you live in Tampa. And what we'll do is we'll defer as much as we can. So when you're living in Tampa where there's no state income tax, you can get all your money then.
Well, and that kind of depends on like whether the Ricketts are willing to put out that kind of financial outlay, because it would end up being probably a richer contract overall, you would think, if they had those deferments, right? Wouldn't it have to be like a $600 million deal if it wasn't paid up front?
It's going to be 600 million anyway.
You really think it's going to be 600 for him?
I really think Kyle Tucker on the open market's getting 12,600.
I keep coming back to 12 and like around like between 10 and 12, and then I think 500 is the max that I'm going for him. And like, not that I think that he shouldn't get more than that. I'm just wondering if maybe teams are going to be like, is he really that level of a player that you're willing to give $600 million to? I'm not positive I see it.
He's going to be the best bat on the market by far.
Right. You're absolutely right about that. And teams will pay for that. But then again, you also have to keep in mind that what teams have already done, with players that they already have under contract too, the Mets with Juan Soto, the Dodgers with Shohei Ohtani, etc. Like, they already have a lot.
The Dodgers don't care.
I know the Dodgers don't give a crap. I also know, I know the San Diego Padres don't give a crap either. I know that they would go out and sign Kyle Tucker in a heartbeat because AJ Prowler is insane. But
yeah,
I think that there is a very strong possibility that the Cubs can still compete financially with those teams in terms of offers. And like you said, you can get a little bit creative with it too. I don't know if over 500 million is going to be what it's going to take to get it done. That's kind of the point where I'm like kind of drawing the line here, I think.
And I think the Phillies are going to say to him, look, we want you to come in and be our right fielder, and we're going to, wish Nick Castellanos well.
That's the team that I'm really the most worried about, to be completely honest. I think that the Phillies are going to be the team absolutely 100% trying to beat out the Cubs for Kyle Tucker. That is just, it's a guy that like fits perfectly what they're trying to do, fits their contention window. I think they're looking at that as a really golden opportunity that they have all the other pieces in place. And by the way, Frank, I would go so far as to say, I think the Phillies might be right there with the Dodgers in terms of the team that I think is top dog in the National League. Like, even now, and then they add in freaking Kyle Tucker next year, look the hell out, man. That would be crazy.
Well, the Phillies are an interesting team because they're such a streaky team.
Yeah.
And when they're hot, they're unbeatable. Because, I mean, the pitching's always pretty good.
Yeah.
And
well, that's the best part about them, is they do have really sound pitching.
Yeah. So, But yeah, they've got all those guys who just break windows.
Yep. I almost thought you were going to say break wind, and I was going to be like, it's not nice to talk about Kyle Schwarber like that.
I got a feeling Kyle is a world champion farter.
He probably is. And I know that's the kind of content that you guys come to Home Runs and Handshakes to get, is to discuss the flatulence of the Phillies, the flatulent Phils, as they like to be called. All right, Claire, you can cancel the rest of this show forever and ever. I'm never coming up with a stupider phrase than the flatulent Phils. That's just not going to happen.
We're printing shirts. Get the guys from Obvious on the phone.
I am a poop poet, apparently. That is what I am here on this podcast. Frank, what the hell are we even going to talk about now? Do you want to talk about the Cubs having this series coming up against the Toronto Blue Jays? That's one of only 3 series left this season. The Cubs are playing a team currently in a playoff spot, and it comes up this week in Toronto. I think it's going to be a very interesting series. I know the Cubs are going to have a pretty solid rotation heading into that, but just kind of curious for your take on, how you think that series is going to play out. And then you kind of look ahead to the following week. You've got the Pirates coming into town, and then you have some team called the Milwaukee Brewers that are going to be in for 5 games after that.
Yeah, I have a feeling by the time we get to Milwaukee, that series is not going to mean as much as it meant 3 weeks ago.
It's because it's going to be minimum 4 or 5 game deficit, and you're only going to end up being able to make up a maximum of probably 3 games if you can somehow win 4 out of 5 against Milwaukee. And I think that if you want to put that down as a bet right now, I think Vegas will happily steal your money from you.
Yeah.
There's no way I would be betting the Cubs to win 4 out of 5 against Milwaukee. I think there is a much higher likelihood that Milwaukee puts this thing away in that series and wins minimum 3 out of 5 against the Cubs.
Yeah, I've not spoken with our gambling consultant, Emmanuel Classe, yet.
Maybe the Cubs could have acquired him at the deadline. It would have helped him to make some financial decisions.
Oh, man. That's one of those things you got to kind of wonder, normally I'd wonder how much of this background stuff are other teams aware of, but then Jed Hoyer apparently wasn't bothered by the fact that Michael Soroka needed an MRI on his shoulder.
Yeah. It's so annoying, dude. It's you complained about the market all you want, and it's you could have just gone out and gotten Class A and been we'll see how this all resolves itself. And what would the Guardians have demanded for him at this point? They would have demanded a bag of baseballs. They were in no negotiation. Although, if you're on the restricted list, can you actually be traded, or is that a no-go?
No, that's a no-go.
I was going to say that, we joke about that, but I was I don't even think it would have been legally possible to do that. The Guardians would have been yes, please. And MLB would have been no. Unfortunately, we can't do that. We can't let you trade him for 20 shares of crypto.com. That's not how this works.
Yeah. And you'd be nuts to trade for him because I don't think he's ever going to be allowed back into baseball.
Ooh, there, another Frank Nova hot take here, a supernova hot take, if you will. So you've so far said the Cubs are guaranteed that they are not bringing back Kyle Tucker, and now you do not think Emmanuel Classe is ever going to pitch another game.
Correct.
All right. Well, Frank is on record with a couple of things here. Claire, do you have any broad pronouncements you would like to make? Any hot takes?
I'll pass.
Well, we gave her the opportunity, folks. She took the microphone and immediately handed it back to us, and you guys are all the poorer for it. So I think we're about to call this one a podcast. We're going to go watch.
Wait. Are we going to speak with, is Neveau the Elder available, or?
Neveau the Elder is listening to the podcast today. We are hoping to convince him to come on next week. If you guys want to email us with questions for the patriarch of the Neveau family, you guys feel free to do it, and perhaps he will feel peer pressured into doing it. But until then, I'm going to say hello.
Do we have an email address?
You know what? We can figure one out. I'm sure people can reach and I, through other channels, should they choose to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, shout out to Patriarch Neveau. Shout out to my mother-in-law, Kathy, for buying me this delicious and wonderful, beverage receptacle. And yeah, I think that's
I actually have those.
As you should. As you should. This is a quality good here, and I appreciate her for purchasing that for me, and we appreciate you guys for listening to this episode of Home Runs and Handshakes. We will talk to you next week, and God only knows what we're going to be talking about at that point. So tune in, see if we're still sane.